Pablo Escobar, Rick Ross. These were guys that were just my friends.
All right, guys, thank you for joining on the Elation podcast today, where we enjoy exhilarating euphoria through creation and collaboration. Today, we are here with the famous Cookie Hood. How are you?
Good morning, David. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Good having you. So, first of all, I love your name. I think we talked about it. Cookie is special to me because that's what I call my wife. So, it's how did you get your name Cookie? Let's just start
The
there.
day I was born. My real name is Courtney Hood. It was given to me at the hospital. There was a cousin there, couldn't pronounce the word Courtney, kept saying cookie, and literally
it just naturally happened.
From day one, it stuck.
That's awesome.
And I remember always saying how weird it was going to be me being 80 or 90 and having the name Cookie Hood. And I'm there. I'm almost there.
I mean, talk about having a name that's just ready for a movie.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know my last name. It's just Cookie.
So
even my kids call me Cookie.
I just think it's just written in stone. There's going to be a movie about you.
Awesome. Well, we're shooting for a TV series.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to all of that later. But let's talk about a little bit like where you're from and your life story.
I was born here in New Orleans, but my father was also from here, and my mother was from Nicaragua, and they met. My grandfather owned an airline, TACA Airlines, and that's how they met. And so I was raised literally in both countries.
Okay.
And I went to school all year long because the school seasons were different in Nicaragua than in the U.S. So I was always in school. I thought I was going to grow up and be a professional student. Yeah, because I was in school all year long.
So in the summer when you went down to Nicaragua?
Well, it was Easter, summer, Christmas vacations.
Gotcha.
So it was literally 50-50.
Gotcha.
And then I would see my father was in the airline business, which made it so easy.
Yeah.
And you could just put the kid on the plane with a note saying, take her to Nicaragua,
right.
Well,
so how much better was flying back then? I mean,
of course.
I mean,
great. And being the daughter of the airline executive,
right.
I'd be up in the cockpit with the pilots, and,
right.
Junior pilot, and it was, to me, it was just like hopping in a car.
Right.
And my first passport was when I was a month old. And so.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, back and forth. So, I mean, what do you feel about New Orleans, and how did that implement your life? Like, how did it, like, I guess, attach itself? Because I feel like New Orleans you went back and forth, but New Orleans
was a big part.
It was a big part.
And obviously it was a big part in a lot of different eras of my life because as well as I do, if you're from New Orleans, you think you can do anything.
Right.
You're capable of doing anything, good or bad.
Right.
And, we kick ass. And I was raised in an era where women were, we were just taught that we're going to be equal, do things just as well or better than any man. And so it was easy to bring that along in my escapades.
Right. Well, so let's talk a little bit about, I guess, how'd you get into your career? You're kind of party girl turned journalist turned Dan Rather's secret weapon. Like, how that was it's a long.
It is, but it's so funny. I went to school, Catholic upbringing, Dominican, Loyola, but I never studied journalism. And no matter how many times through the years I would tell my colleagues, I never studied journalism. They still think I studied journalism because I just picked it up so quickly, ran with it,
right,
head on, and again, with no fear.
Well, some things you're just naturally good at.
Yeah, I mean, if I told you, I majored in liberal arts, okay? Languages, history, English lit. So, which all did serve me
Was
well
absolutely, that's
because you could talk to kings and queens as well as you could talk to a chauffeur, a gardener.
well, all that you do in book reports too, which is technically journalism because you're reading something and then you're explaining the
Yeah,
story. So, like,
yeah.
all that stuff, it kind of fits in. But
And I would always adapt to being whatever I needed to be at any given moment, at any given point in my life.
but I think the number one key to journalism is relationships. I
Absolutely.
I don't think you get real stories without getting a real
And it
relationship.
isn't just journalism. It was the drug business. It was any business. It's networking.
Right.
And a lot of my networking overlapped, from my drug years to the journalism years. There was always a lot of overlap
Right.
because you know as well as I do, we're from New Orleans, we know everybody,
Right.
you know,
Right. No,
and
you're connected to everybody
and
down here.
Nicaragua was no different.
Right.
It was a small, big country
Right.
where you knew everybody, and
Right. Well, especially in certain networks and certain circles, it was
yeah,
as the higher you got, the circles got smaller, and then everybody truly knew
and in
everybody.
Nicaragua was like, 1% owned the whole country and
Right.
99% lived in abject poverty.
Right. 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 Right.
But my daddy always told me, you treat the lady like a whore, the whore like a lady, and everything's going to work out. So
That's great advice.
I always did that.
That's great
You treat the
advice.
gardener like he's a general,
Right.
and you treat the general like he's a piece of shit.
Yep.
And they love
And
it.
they love it. Right. Yeah, because the general doesn't want to kiss ass. And the gardener deserves some respect. So if you
Exactly.
think about it in full circle,
Exactly.
it makes sense.
Exactly.
Well, so let's talk. Let's talk about meeting your husband and that whole situation. So you were partying before you met your husband, or how did
Well,
all
no, we
that?
grew up
You
together
grew
in
up together.
Nicaragua.
Okay.
He was older than I was, but he was already partying, and it was in we met as children when we advanced to partying after the earthquake hit in Nicaragua, and we just knew each other our whole lives
Right.
as friends, relations, and he was always my drug dealer too. But when I say dealer, I never paid. He would just give me everything because it's cookie.
Right.
And so we separate. We didn't see each other for many years, and then I believe when I was in New York modeling, I took a quick R&R to Miami, and he was there, and he was now had moved up
He
in
moved up in the
his
chain.
world,
Right.
and he was now dealing directly with the Colombian drug cartel, and also with old friends from Nicaragua
Right.
who loved me when I was a little kid, and I would be that little mascot, that little girl. We'll let her hang around with us,
Right. Right. Right.
even though we're 5, 10 years older than her,
Right.
and we're in drug business, but she likes to get high, so,
Right.
and she's cool. So unknowingly, unwittingly, they were training me
Right.
for the drug business, and then later,
I mean, it's really a family. Like the drug business, the people around, they consider themselves family. I mean, once you've kind of bypassed a certain spectrum in their world, like it's kind of a close knit family, right?
well, and it was also, Pablo Escobar, Rick Ross. These were guys that were just my friends.
Right.
They weren't Rick Ross or Pablo Escobar the way the world knew them.
Right.
Plus, I was friends with them before what the world
Well, I was
knew
gonna say the
them.
world didn't know them yet.
Yeah.
Like,
So, and then because I continued to be this mascot even in getting older, I was the only girl at the table
right.
because they knew I was cool.
Right.
They knew I partied. They knew that I would keep my mouth shut
Right.
no matter what. And surprisingly, they always listened to any advice that I would have to give or was asked to give. And sometimes, and many times, they listened to me because these are all Latino guys from countries where they could buy themselves out of anything.
Right.
They were the leaders in their field, in their
Right.
countries,
Bigger than the government.
but they never would be aware of the U.S. government laws and I was always had one foot in that door,
Right.
keeping them, look, y'all got to be cool here. You can't do this. You can't do that.
A
So,
little bit of an insider.
and as long as they kept me happy,
Right. You were almost doing journalism for them.
yeah, it was like
In
a
a
PR.
sense, you
Yeah,
were giving them advice
it really was. Yeah.
okay, well, so, did your husband ever live in New Orleans, or did he kinda stay fluid?
He would come in and out. He the whole United States was his business
Right.
world, and so we lived in Miami. We lived. We didn't want. I didn't want to live here because I knew my family, my friends were here, and I didn't ever want to be that close to them.
Right.
So we lived in Miami. We lived in San Francisco. We lived in L.A. We lived in Nicaragua. Obviously, we were everywhere. Sometimes sort of legally and sometimes on the run.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely want to talk about on the run a little bit later, but and we kind of, your story's crazy, so we kind of jumped a little, fast forward. But I did kind of want to ask, uh, Cookie as a little girl, what did you want to do growing up? What was your thoughts?
I was going to be a professional student because I just love going to school. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to be, but I remember my dad asking me once, "What do you think you're doing not taking science or math in college?" I said, "Look, all I know is that I will be able to talk to kings and queens as well as drivers and maids and chauffeurs." And he's like, "Well, what does that mean?" And it really didn't mean
Like
at the
one singular
moment,
thing, right?
but that's what turned out to happen.
Right.
I was friends with kings and queens, and the
Relationship building.
streetwalker, the
Yep.
hooker on the corner.
Yep.
Because let me tell you, you get your news, and you get your
Everybody's got a story, and sometimes the dirtiest ones.
and you get
Yep.
insight,
Yep.
and you get we know this, we know that, and behind every story there's truth.
Right.
So listen, my sources were everybody.
That's awesome.
Everybody.
That's awesome. Well, so all right, so you known your husband forever. You grew up together. A little bit. So my wife and I, we've known each other since seventh grade. So a little bit of the same story in a sense. We didn't. We dated in eighth grade, whatever that means, and then we stayed friends throughout the years as we both. She lived in New York for a while. I moved all over the place, and then I moved back to New Orleans almost 7 years ago now. We as soon as I moved back, we linked up.
As if nothing, no time had ever passed.
No,
Yeah.
and because we have known each other for so long, things moved really fast. We were
Yeah.
both looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
And it just manifested itself into what it is. So kind of a similar story.
It
in a
was the
sense.
same story,
Yeah.
and till the day he died, we were close. And
That's awesome.
we'd been divorced for 30 years, but and besides, he was the father of my son, but we remained close till the day he died.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so what was your wedding like? I want to know what your
Well,
wedding
which
like.
one?
Well,
I've had several weddings,
okay,
but I
well-
think I know the one you want to talk about, but they were all epic.
Epic, huh?
All of them. But this particular one, it's when I was marrying
Yes.
Chino. And I think at the time we were based in San Francisco because that's where one of the higher ups was based. And Chino wasn't really good at business, of that business.
Gotcha.
I was the brains behind it because he would just get stupid. He'd have a cocktail, start doing blow, and just get stupid. But we decided, I was 8 months pregnant. We said, you know what, let's do it. So Norbert Meneses, who is a very, very well-known, prominent in the drug world, he was, equal with Pablo Escobar. And they all loved Chino because they knew he was not going to steal from them. They knew
Right.
he was a loyal guy. And they knew he had me,
Right.
kind of backing him up. And so we decided to throw this wedding in San Francisco. We invited a Unitarian minister because he, you know, could come to the house. And Pablo gave me half a pound of Coke. And I remember flying in some friends from New Orleans. And we spent like 2 days just grinding everything up into 2 gram bottles.
Wow.
Those were going to be the
The
favors with
favors.
little
Wow.
bows on them.
Wow.
And Chapito Arias from Santana, the bongo player, he was going to be the best man, and Norman Meneses, who was going to walk me down the aisle. And it was just completely bonkers.
Wow.
And, you know, you can imagine all the partying, and it lasted for 2 days. And then I went on the honeymoon by myself because my husband was in the basement. Freebase had just started, so he was down there.
Ay.
And so I just went on the honeymoon by myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you do a seating chart for that?
Well, I saw that question. There was no
There was no seating chart?
Unless
Nobody-
you considered the bathroom.
Right, I was going to say, nobody
chart.
sat.
Well, you'd sit in the tub, and somebody would sit on top of the, you know, the toilet, and, you know, the Coke wraps.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the seating.
That's funny.
Placements,
Well,
yeah.
I was just wondering if
Well, there was a party literally in every room
every
of the house.
Right,
you know,
right.
basement was one. So there was no seating, and people were up for, you know. I understand that the party went on for about 3 or 4 days. I left
You
on the
left
second day
for
to
the
go on the
honeymoon.
honeymoon. Yeah,
Well, that's you
by
know,
myself, and I had a great time.
well, you know,
Great time.
sometimes it's just the way to go too. You know, I mean,
Well, every time I would have a wedding, it would just be epic, unique, and none of my marriages lasted more than 2 years because I was like the guy, you know,
Right.
slam bam, thank you, guy. And after 2 years, just get out of my life.
right.
But we all remained friends. All my ex-husbands are friends. So it worked out.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it's that's definitely just a crazy story. I mean, I can't imagine all
And
those,
having
all of
Pablo,
those
and no
people.
cameras were allowed.
Well, I was gonna say,
No
yeah,
cameras were allowed.
Yeah.
That was a very big no-no in the drug world at the time. You know, guys would grab a camera and just throw it on the ground, and so no pictures. I think there's one picture from the wedding when we were doing the actual vows.
okay.
And it was just my husband, Chino, and myself, and that's it. No other pictures.
There was no guest pictures.
No.
So no,
It was
so-
evidence.
Right.
You couldn't have evidence.
Right. So,
yeah.
so all of those movies that show all of these films from the weddings and stuff back in the day, they didn't do any of that stuff.
Well, a lot of them might have, you
Right.
know, but mine were just down and dirty, you know. Everybody dressed to kill, and, you know, and after 24 hours, everybody
tried to kill themselves.
and everybody's fucked up, and the eyes, and, you know.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But that's great. I mean, listen, life is short. You got to have fun while you're in it. You know.
Yeah. Until the fun turns against
Until
you.
the fun turns against you. It
Yeah.
always does.
It always
It
does.
always does. Well, let's talk a little bit about partying and becoming a journalist. What was the party that led to that meeting?
Well, obviously, everything we're talking about is included in our podcast.
Right.
Which Steve Estab, Sean Donnelly, and Jason Wagenspack are involved. And so it's called Journalista.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not my whole life because we couldn't fit it
Right.
into it. So we start off with my modeling career in New York City, which started off here in New Orleans, then led to that. Then it went on into, you know, the Colombian drug cartel. And then somehow or another, the revolution had begun in Nicaragua. I was here finishing up Loyola because I was on the 10-year plan, leaving, getting married, coming back, getting divorced, coming back. And I said, let me go see what this fucking revolution's all about. And I took, you know, my son, he was a year old, and we just moved there. And after about 3 months, I was like, okay, I'm seeing what it's about. It's rough.
Right.
Everything scarce, no water one day, no eggs one day, no toilet paper one day, which we can all relate to for pandemic
From
now.
COVID now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I decided I'm going to throw myself a going away party because my parties throughout my life and in every era of my life were epic.
Right.
And I hate keep throwing that word around,
No,
but
hey,
I'm
it's
telling you, they were always parties for the books. And so I threw this huge party, gay, straight, white, black, Latino, young, old, soldiers, drug dealers, society people, you name it,
Yep.
journalists, you name it. They were all there.
Listen, throwing parties is something that's a
Well, that I
lost
was,
art.
and I was good
So
at
it's a
it.
lost art. So just a quick little bit. My grandfather's Morse Bart is his friend, and
Oh, I know you, Grandpa.
well, no. So my grandfather was David Burris, but yeah,
I know.
you
Okay,
yeah
then we'll talk.
I'm sure you know the name.
We'll talk about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, so Morris Bart and I were got together for Metairie Country Club. We were became members the same month, and so at the first meeting, at the first party, I went up to him and said, "Hey, you and I were inducted the same month. And I'm David Adams." Da, 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 da. And I said, "I think you know my grandfather, David Burris." And he goes,
We couldn't believe
"Wait."
it.
He goes, "Wait, your
Because
grandfather
we
was
all
David
know
Burris?"
everybody.
But wait, the first thing he said, he goes, "I've been to some wild parties at your grandfather's house." That was his first
Wow.
response. So when you go back to partying, it is something that everybody's human. Everybody wants to have fun. Everybody's human, and they will remember a good party.
Well,
So,
and my
yeah.
parties were not just about the liquor, which was usually,
Right.
champagne, but the drugs
Right.
were part of the party.
Right.
And the guest list
The
was
guest
always
list.
just so eclectic, and even later on as a journalist, I would throw parties with senators, congressmen that would come
Right.
to Nicaragua to check out the war, and I would have them sitting at a table with a hooker that they didn't know was a hooker. It was just
the ultimate
fun.
host.
Yeah, and
The ultimate host.
Yeah, and my parties were great. Plus, they lasted always more than 24 hours.
Well, that's great. So back to the party. So you're
So
throwing
I'm
your
at the
yeah.
party, and this lady comes up to me, and she says, "I'm a producer for NBC. We need someone to run the NBC bureau here." And I'm like, "Okay, that sounds interesting. Sounds like something I could do." What they wanted was a fixer translator. She says, "I can't imagine anyone better than you because you seem to know everyone.
Right.
And it sort of looks like you might even know the enemies on either side." And so I was thinking about it. And at the same party, this other producer comes up to me from CBS News, Larry Doyle, who later I found out was a notorious, not only prolific partier, but the best at war coverage in the world.
Right.
So he comes up to me, and we're doing blow in the bathroom and all. And he comes up and offers me the same job.
Right.
And I'm like, do I go with the party guy or do I go with the straight late producer lady? I'm going with CBS. And
You
the
can be
rest is
yourself.
history.
Yeah, you can be yourself there.
So he puts me in charge of the bureau. I go in the next day for an interview. I'm asked 2 questions by another producer. "How do you feel about roadblocks?" I'm like, "Roadblocks? I can get in and out of anything. I'm from
Right.
New Orleans." And the other question was, "What is your biggest asset?" I thought about 30 seconds. I said, "Adaptability." She's like, "Explain." I said, "Well, I could sleep at the Plaza Hotel in New York like I could sleep in a shack on top of coffee beans
Right.
in a jungle."
Right.
She says, "You got the job. We want you here tomorrow morning, 8:30. You're going up north." I think I'm going to Miami.
Right.
So I get all dressed up with the pearls and the heels. I walk in. She says, "Where do you think you're fucking going?" I said, "Well, you said north. I thought Miami." She says, "You're going to the fucking jungle. Go change. You're going." So on my first day, they sent me into the
Into the
jungles,
jungle.
but with an experienced camera crew, which you'll meet them in, the podcast. And they taught me so much.
Wow.
And every crew I would ever get, because crews would be flown in and out.
Right.
They would stay months, 6 weeks at a time. And since I took care of everybody, because we're from New Orleans, we take
Right.
care
That's
of
what we do.
everybody.
Right.
And I was taught by the best.
That's awesome.
Which is why to this day everybody still thinks I studied journalism. But I was taught by the best, how to get the story.
Right.
And
you already had the relationship, so
already had the Rolodex, as they called back then.
Right.
And I knew the enemy in one country. I knew the people we would be supporting in another country. And it was like that Woody Allen movie, Bananas, where the soldiers are in the aircraft getting ready to be parachuted into a third world country. And one of the guys says to the other, whose side are we on? Are we on the government or the rebels?
Right.
And the other soldier says, well, the government's not taking any chances this time. Half of us are going with the rebels and half of us are going with the government. And it was like that.
Wow.
I was friends with the upper echelon, the guys, the Contras, the Comandantes, and I was friends with the Comandantes of the Sandinistas.
Right.
And then in El Salvador, it was inverted. We supported, the military and were against the rebels. So it was just insane.
So how do you feel about, what was your perspective on all of that with the war? Like who was on the right side, who was on the wrong side? Like,
let me preface it by saying that I'm literally related to the bad guys. The death squad people in El Salvador were all oligarchs and, the rich.
Right.
In Nicaragua, the dictatorship that was finally overthrown, that was my family's societal group.
Right.
And so I was always related to the bad guys, but my American side said you got to be for the underdog.
Right.
And it did look like the underdogs were actually trying to get good done for the masses.
Right.
Which the oligarchs and the top 1%, they don't give a fuck about.
No, they needed workers.
So, and I was a drug person. I was a partier.
Right.
So the rich people, the rich kids, we all party.
Right. But the Contras were the dealers, right? Because
the Contras were not the dealers, but they were in cahoots with the dealers, who happened to be my friends from the drug world.
Right.
This is where things started to overlap.
Right.
And I remember when I first got the job with CBS, I told them straight up, I'll do any story you want except drug stories. And you would think that the next question would be, why not?
Right. They didn't say
They knew something was up, so they said, okay, we'll respect that. Because I didn't want to be on the other side of the camera, going in on bus, where it could have been me on that other side.
Right.
Well,
you'll also never get access again. You did one story like that.
Or I could get killed.
Right.
Or I don't want to bust my friends.
Right.
And just the thought of doing to them what I always was in fear, mortal fear happening to me back in the drug days. So it was quite interesting how all the worlds converged. The heads of the Contras I grew up with. The heads of the dictatorships in several countries I grew up with. But then in the meantime, I became friends with the poor people and all of that. And we have a cameraman who you'll meet in the podcast, Manny Alvarez, who says that he truly believes we were never killed directly by any of these groups because we treated people with kindness. And also, we look like aliens. I mean, I'd bust in with a wife beater T-shirt, no bra, Walkman, cigarettes, and incredibly, I could speak the
Lingo,
lingo
right.
of the jungle people, and
Right.
so
What was your favorite story from being in the jungle and like was there like moments where you woke up in the middle of the night and you're like, what the hell am I doing? Or like,
well, it wouldn't be favorite story because they were all horrible
okay,
stories, but I can't really pick one. I'll just say briefly, I was shot down in a Russian helicopter. I was held at gunpoint. I was wounded in the jungles because I was embedded. I was one of the first females embedded with the soldiers. No matter what side I was covering and
right,
what country, I was in the jungles with the soldiers.
right,
So I think the first pile of dead bodies is what changed me.
right.
And when I say pile of dead bodies, I mean women, children, beheaded, shot, thrown. I mean, I lost my faith
Yeah,
at that moment, as many of us did.
yeah,
You have to be a very special breed to be a war correspondent
right,
because you work hard, but you partied even harder because you didn't know if you were going to make it the next day. So and once you listen to the podcast, you will hear many of these horrific stories
right,
that somehow or another I got out of because I could have been killed just as easily,
right.
or because I witnessed something that I shouldn't have been witnessing,
Right,
I could have been shot. But I made nice with everybody.
right.
I was kind to everybody, and I looked like a fucking alien. I looked like I came from Mars.
Do you think any of that gave you PTSD from seeing some of
Well,
that
war
stuff?
in general gave me PTSD, as
Right,
it did with most war correspondents,
right,
because you're with soldiers who have weapons, and the only weapons we had were our cameras and our recorders
right.
and
And
ourselves.
yourselves, right.
And I found myself having to talk myself out of
Getting killed multiple times, probably, huh?
many
Yeah.
times. And being from New Orleans,
Yep.
we can talk ourselves in and out of anything.
In and out of everything. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And especially when you're speaking their language, you're speaking their slang, you're
Yep.
speaking, you get down to their level. And I don't mean get down in a bad way,
Right.
but adaptability.
No, I always said I can talk myself in and out of handcuffs.
Exactly. And I was several times in
Yeah.
handcuffs or firing squads or, kidnapped, or you name it, it all happened to me.
Well,
I still have shrapnel
Oh God.
all over.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's crazy. Well, so a lot of people I think forget about the Russians' involvement in this. How many times did you come across the Russians? I know you said you were in a Russian helicopter, which had
So
to be a
this
crazy
is the
story.
deal. The U.S. is famous for making a problem, then going in to fix it, and then it creates
Another problem.
another problem,
Right.
usually worse.
Right.
So there were several wars in Nicaragua. In the 70s, it was the revolution, the Sandinistas overthrowing the dictator. Then my career, the majority of my career, was covering the Sandinistas having won the war,
Right.
and then the U.S. trying to overthrow them. So then that was a civil war, because the Contras were Nicaraguans too,
Right.
being trained by our government. So I forgot the question.
No, we were talking about the Russians. So
The
like,
Russians.
yeah.
So what happened was the U.S. was with the Sandinistas when they overthrew Somoza at the beginning.
Right. And then the Russians got involved.
But then they didn't like that the Sandinistas were trying to give free education, free medical care to everyone. So the U.S. then cuts them off.
Wow.
What happens then? They got to turn to Russia,
Right.
Cuba,
Right.
all the countries that
All
would
the
give them
communist
money.
countries.
They
Yeah,
had to
absolutely.
survive.
Absolutely. Well,
So-
and they're all those countries are looking to get closer to the U.S. somehow, just like they were in Cuba with the Cold War, right?
And it's not that I came across Russians per se, but I did come across Cubans. And of course, Russia was supplying
Right.
weapons and helicopters,
Helicopters.
MiGs, and all that kind of stuff. So I never really met Russians except at the embassy and stuff like that. But I dealt with their liaisons, the people
Gotcha.
they were
And the
supplying.
Cubans that they were paying to be there.
And the
Yeah.
Cubans, no, they didn't have, the Cubans were doing it for free.
No.
Because the Cubans also in revolution, they want to feed the poor, they want to give health care to the poor, and which they haven't done a very good job of
No.
lately, but because the US cut them off. When the Cubans won their revolution, the US was for Castro.
Right.
Till they didn't like what
Until
he
they
was
liked what he was
doing,
doing.
being helping
Too
poor
giving.
people. So Cubans were there all the time teaching as doctors and all for free.
It's
But you
almost
couldn't see them
right. Well, it's almost like the U.S. creates these enemies.
because we want to we install a problem, then we want to fix that
Right.
problem and get another problem.
Right. You
But
can't just throw money at something and fix a problem.
but they hid the Russians and the Cubans. They were always pretty well hid. But there's a great story that not only I could speak Spanish, but I could do all dialects. So one time I get wind that the Cubans are coming in, doctors
Wow.
and teachers, but nobody's gonna get access to them.
Right.
Well, I get to the airport and I start throwing around my Cuban accent.
Right.
Get it? They let me on the plane.
That's
I'm
awesome.
filming.
That's awesome.
I'm filming. I'm doing it. And one down on the tarmac, a Sandinista soldier looks at the airport security guy, says, "What the fuck are you doing?" He goes, "Well, she's from Cuban TV." No, she's not. She's a fucking American. Get her out of that
Get her-
plane and get that tape.
Right.
And we know how to do the old tape switcheroo.
Right.
I could see them coming. I tell the sound man, switch tapes, put a blank tape in your thing, and give me the tape, and I
Right.
put it in
Right. Stuff it.
in my pants. And they got me out, and I got
And they
that
gave it-
story.
and you gave it
I
out
got
tape.
the exclusive story.
That's awesome.
And also, same thing happened with a Russian ship. You know, I just happened to have made a friend. A guy had video from Havana TV. Says, "I got video of the Russian ship you've been looking for, and an interview with the captain." I'm like, "Wait, what?" Here, you can have a copy. He
Right.
gives it to me. We broke that story.
Wow. Wow. No, and it is crazy because they definitely all have different dialects. I mean, I
Oh, I could do any dialect.
I explained to you, I rode Pasofino horses forever, and here in the States, you've got Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Colombians,
Dominicans, yeah.
Dominicans.
all of it.
They're all riding horses, and I spoke to them all differently. They
Yeah.
all have different slangs and different words.
So you
Everybody
speak
uses
Spanish?
Un poquito.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you see right there,
Yeah.
I could tell you have a good accent.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that helps.
Right.
And that, of course, came from studying languages at Loyola.
Right.
The dialects.
Right. Well, it's also being around. I learned most of it from being around.
That's
You
it.
know,
That's it.
And traveling a lot when I was a kid. So
That's it. But
um,
yeah, that served me very well, and in getting stories, and you know, I just
yeah, because if you went in there speaking Spanish, like you learned
or
in Spanish
or
class,
just English,
but you like speaking Spanish that you learn in Spanish class, or just English. You're right, but in a very it's almost in an uppity way when you go
well,
in
I
there.
already did because I spoke Spanish since I was born.
Right. Right.
It was my first language.
right.
So correct, it was the educated Spanish.
Yeah.
But I could do the educated and the poor
And the poor
Spanish,
Spanish, right.
in any dialect.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But but the main thing was just knowing everyone.
Right.
I knew everyone, good and bad.
Right. Well, and that's a hell of a balancing act. You know, that's a hell of a balancing
that
act. And
balancing
I
act
think New
ca-
Orleans is a perfect place for you to come from for the balancing
Well,
act.
the balancing act came from as you say, New
Yeah.
Orleans, because I was one person when I lived here. I was another person when I lived in Latin America.
Right.
And so the balancing act was ongoing from the time I was born.
Right. Right. No,
I've been doing it my whole life.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Well, I mean,
some
even
water?
growing up, yeah, absolutely. Even growing up down here, I mean, I just feel like going from the business district downtown to Bourbon Street is a change of lifestyle.
Yeah, it's like partying
It's
uptown or downtown.
you know,
Oh yeah,
so
you got your downtown accent,
yeah, 100%.
and friends, and you got your uptown
Absolutely. Well, and
accent
my dad's from
friends.
the West Bank,
Oh
so yeah, my
Lord.
dad.
Oh,
And
so
my
you
mom's
could,
from the East Bank,
so you could play it all.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
so yeah, my dad's from Crown Point, so
Yeah, you sound like you've had a very interesting life too, David.
we've moved around and been around the world a
That's
little
the
bit.
key.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the key to
Well,
life. Yeah.
it's the key to any door you want to get into, because I've met some of the best people in the world partying and that have continued on relationships, but I've also met some of the best people in the world at their lowest, and now they're doing great big things.
Oh, I've been in back
So,
alleys in the middle of at 3 o'clock in the morning with complete strangers. It's a miracle I'm here.
listen,
Yeah.
I've stumbled around parts of Mexico
Oh,
at
no.
14 years old, drunk off my ass,
Oh,
doing
you're lucky.
tequila shots all night, stumbling,
But you
trying
look-
to find
you
my way
look a
back.
little
I look a
Latino,
little
so that was
Spanish, and I
okay.
spoke enough, and I was drunk, so they just thought, oh, he's drunk. But
But if you'd have been a straight up gringo,
oh no,
yeah.
no! It was
God forbid.
no, 100%. But
God forbid.
definitely helped me just the way I
Yeah.
looked a little bit.
And then also in the drug world, it was, I could have died at any moment there, not just because of the people I was hanging out with, but because I was consuming
right,
the amounts of drugs that I was consuming were fatal amounts.
right. Well, and you were doing it the whole time you were journalism. You were doing journalism, right?
Oh, but I was doing it before.
Right, but I mean, but in the jungle, you're bringing it with you.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's crazy.
We would set up a little in our Jeeps. We'd set up a little bar. We'd have the Walkman with the speakers. We'd have the drugs,
Man.
which sometimes was great and
Right.
sometimes got me in trouble.
Right.
But again, I could talk myself
Stuff out of it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I think a lot of times it probably showed that they were okay with you being around because you were doing it yourself. So you were your own
Well,
addict.
they
You
were doing
understood
it
their
with you.
world. Right. So like it kind of like blended
You mean
the
the other
world.
journalists?
Yeah.
They were doing it with me.
Yeah. Okay.
And it goes back to a war correspondent is extremely different from a regular Joe Blow journalist in the, covering regular stories.
What's high stress?
High stress, and who else would
Right.
run into danger, run into war without a weapon, and you didn't have to do it?
Right.
Well, who would do that?
Somebody crazy enough to do drugs.
And we were all pretty much different levels of insane, but clearly all of us insane. And not every war correspondent partied. They all drank.
Right.
But then, the younger ones, we brought in the drugs into the picture. But who else would do that
Right.
unless you were fucking high?
Right. Yeah. No, I hear
You
you.
know?
I mean, even some of the stuff that I've heard, I've had a lot of friends that have gone off into like the war in Iraq and
As
some-
soldiers?
soldiers,
Uh-huh.
yeah, on the front lines, and
Yeah.
they were said specifically that they were given ecstasy,
Oh.
cocaine, weed, LSD.
I think it all started in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, I also worked with the big boys at 60 Minutes. And there were several of them that would even think about doing a story in Latin America
Without
unless
you.
Cookie was there.
Right. So,
Whether it was Panama, Guatemala, Haiti, the Caribbean, she's got to be there.
right. Well,
And they still thought I was a journalist, but it's because they knew Cookie would not only get the job done, she's going to keep us alive.
right.
She would have to be killed first before we would be killed, and she ain't going to let
And
that
she ain't
happen.
gonna let it happen, right?
And I'm talking Morley Safer, Mike Wallace, Don Hewitt, who invented 60 Minutes,
Right.
called me, that crazy broad that lives in the asshole of the world, that crazy bitch.
Right. Right.
And these were old school guys from they were started out in the Vietnam War.
Right.
And I was one of the guys because I'm the oldest of 8. I've got 5 brothers. I was one of the
It's made
guys
sense.
always.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then Dan Rather called you his special
He
secret
called
weapon,
me
right?
his secret weapon because I always got what nobody else could get.
What was your favorite thing about Dan Rather?
Just getting what we called back then a rathergram. He would send you a telex, a telegram, and, good kill, great story.
Great story, right.
If you got a rathergram,
You did
you
something
knew
right?
it. Yeah. And see, Dan didn't come down to Latin America. By that time, he was, the
Star of the show.
the star of the show. But of course, when I'd go to New York, we'd
Right.
hang out and
Right.
everything and then he didn't party, but I'm not going to name names, but some of the 60 Minutes guys
Right.
were partying right
Partying.
alongside me with the drugs.
Right.
But they were all dirty old men, and I could be a dirty old man with the best of them.
Yeah.
And I was a good wingman, too, for guys, and even the married ones, Cookie can get us anything.
Again, being from New Orleans, like
Being from New Orleans.
yeah,
Yep.
the ultimate host.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
You don't show up with your hand with empty hands.
Empty hands,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, we're here to help and be a part of the party.
Yeah, and I think it all stems, though, David, from the fact that I took care of everyone so I wouldn't have to take care of myself.
Right.
I wouldn't have to look inward and say, you got a problem here, girl.
Right.
You drinking way too much, you partying way too much. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What was your favorite story you handed over to Dan?
Well, the biggest story, and I knew it at the moment that it was the biggest story of the decade, and I got the exclusive. For 10 years at that point, the world and journalists are trying to prove that the U.S. is fucking involved in trying to illegally overthrow an elected government. It's
Right.
against the rules.
Absolutely.
And, you could say that they were training Contras in the U.S. You could say this, but there was never really any hard proof.
Evidence, right.
I'm in Miami on R&R. I get a call from the President Ortega's right-hand guy, and he says to me, we caught him. Who? We caught this guy. He's a pilot for the CIA. He jumped out of the plane. Everyone was killed. We got him. He's a kicker. He was kicking out propaganda, supplies for the Contras. We got him, Cookie. You want him? And I'm like, okay, let me call Dan. Let me call Mike Wallace, Don Hewitt. I called first the creator of 60 Minutes, who was a complete insane, the craziest person I've ever worked with. And I had Mike on the conference call. I said, guys, listen to what I'm going to offer this guy, Ortega's right-hand guy. This guy's captured. They're going to put him on trial. They're going to find him guilty. I don't think they're going to kill him. They might sentence him to death,
Right.
but I don't think they're going to kill him. They don't want more problems with the U.S. than they have. What if I convince him to give me this guy, and we interview him this Sunday for 60 minutes, have him confess to the world before the trial even goes on? Dan, Mike's loving it. Mike Wallace, Don Hewitt, they're loving it.
Right.
I called Ortega's guy, said, look, let us have him before y'all put him on trial, because everybody's going to say your trial is a farce.
Right.
It's not real. You're going to sentence him to death, whatever. Let me get him first. In your prison or wherever you got him.
Right.
Let him
come interview.
confess
Right.
that Sunday, because he's going on trial the next day, Monday.
Wow.
Everyone agreed. Next thing I know, I'm being Learjetted out of Miami, but not before I saw my ex-husband Chino to get some supplies, because I'm going on the Learjet.
Because I'm going on the Learjet.
And then we go in and we get Haas and Foose, and I knew I had the story
Wow.
of the fucking decade.
Wow.
But I don't know how much I've got. And because when this guy bailed, he was the only one that had a parachute, a lot of business cards and briefcase from the pilot who perished were found. And the Sandinistas had logged a business card from a Swiss
Bank
bank,
account. Wow.
and it had a slew of numbers on the back, and they registered it as a phone number. I knew that was no fucking
That was an
phone
account
number.
number, huh? Yeah.
So I fly in, I do the interview, we do the interview. Mike came in, Don Hewitt came in. We're doing the interview in a Sandinista safe house with the head of state security. I'm asking the head of state security, where's your bathroom? So I could go in the bathroom. And I said, that's the best line I ever did, was in a safe house of state security. Anyway, make a long story short, I kept asking Mike, oh, they said after the interview with Hasenfuss, do you want another interview? I said, get me Ortega, the president. Nobody gets Ortega just like that. I got Ortega.
Wow.
So I kept saying to Mike Wallace, ask Ortega if it's possible that Eugene could be home for Christmas after the trial. He didn't want to do it. Don Hewitt said, God damn it, Mike, ask him the damn question.
Wow.
He asks him the question, and Ortega says, anything is possible. I know the guy's coming home for Christmas. They're going to find him guilty. They're going to sentence him to death, but then they're going to send him home for Christmas. And that's exactly what happened. Afterwards, I get access to this evidence that was found on the shot down flight.
Right.
And here's that card. And I knew that this was, what is the pilot, a lowly pilot, not Hasenfuss, but the pilot that got killed, doing with a Swiss bank account number?
Right.
So I called the Swiss bank and I said, look, I know y'all can't give me any information. I'm going to read you a slew of numbers. Just tell me, could it be an account? I read him the slew of numbers. He says yes and hangs up that phone. He was the vice president of that Swiss bank account, Swiss bank.
Wow.
Again, I call Washington. I call New York. We got something here.
Right.
I don't know what it means, but there's a Swiss bank account out there, and it's so well hidden. They got it with this guy, but this guy's such an idiot. He had it with him on the plane.
Right.
And that was the beginning where the chips started to fall for Iran-Contra.
Wow.
That's how it happened. That was the slush fund money being used to finance training the Contras to illegally overthrow a government.
What was the pilot doing with the number?
It was on a briefcase that he had shackled to his head because he was... Somebody had to have that card.
Right.
Because it was a secret.
Right.
So that starts the ball rolling there. You have to understand, the original slush fund was, listen to this, we were selling surreptitiously weapons to Iran,
right,
our mortal enemy, so we could take that money, hide it, and
never
train
bring it
the
in the US.
Contras.
Right.
And train the Contras. That's all it was for. Well, when my story starts to come out, and I'm not going to say I'm the only one involved.
Right.
All the journalists that were around me were involved. Photographers, print. We all had different parts of it.
Right.
I had the biggest piece, though.
Right. Right.
The biggest piece. And so they get found out, the Oliver North thing. And
right.
Okay. So now the U.S. government has to come up with another means of money, hidden money, to support the Contras. This is where the crack cocaine comes in.
Right.
Guess who's the number one pilot to bring in the crack cocaine to Rick Ross in L.A.? My old buddy, Nordring Meneses.
Wow.
And obviously my ex-husband's involved.
Right.
And
well, this is where Barry Seal gets involved.
Barry Seal was one of our employees.
Right.
But Barry Seal had a big mouth. He would get drunk, he'd get high, big mouth. I told him one day, it's going to get you in trouble.
And that's what happened, yep.
It did.
Yep.
So this is the new slush fund with the crack cocaine, bringing it in, And yes, it's true. I will allay everybody's doubts right now. We did introduce crack cocaine
Wow.
into this country.
The government did.
The government, because
Yep.
they needed now a new slush fund because the old one got found out.
Right. Now, was this Carter or Reagan at this time?
Everything's Reagan.
Everything's Reagan.
Carter never did anything bad.
Okay.
Except whatever
Screwed up
the
with-
Republicans blame him for.
Right.
Carter was an honorable man. And he actually, we became very close in Nicaragua. He was coming not only to monitor elections, but to build houses for Habitat for Humanity. And he lived on the same floor that I lived in at the hotel.
Okay,
so
got you. Y'all-
he, Miss
yep.
Roslyn, we all became friends.
That's awesome. So he was actually doing good things.
Always. And then everything was Reagan.
Gotcha.
And then I slowly and unknowingly was put on Reagan's blacklist.
Wow.
And you have to understand, at this point, Reagan's got Alzheimer's. No one knows it except his wife and his brilliant VP, George H.W. Bush,
right.
who, even though I don't agree with his politics, was brilliant.
He was.
And he was the head of the CIA.
Yeah.
Had been.
Yeah.
So he was running that whole show for 8 years. That's who was running it.
Wow.
But I think that was my best story because I knew that we had the story of the decade and the story we had all been looking for and used to prove.
I mean, that's a part of history. Like, I mean,
I know.
You change the dynamics of history by releasing
Well, I was
that.
a part of it.
Right.
A big part, big little piece of the puzzle, but a part nonetheless. And years later, I found out there was a commission being set up. This is after I'm out of the business. And Congress wanted to find out, was it true that, the government introduced crack? And they were looking for me to testify. I went underground again for a couple of years. I wasn't going to go testify against the government while I'm back in the U.S.
I wouldn't. I definitely wouldn't either.
And then guess who? I was more scared of being killed by our government than I was scared of being killed by
the drug dealers.
Drug dealers or soldiers. It was my government that scared me more.
That makes a lot of
when
sense.
I would come to U.S. for R&R.
Well, you talked about being on the lam a little bit. And I guess you went on the lam from the U.S. government a few times.
I was on the lam many times from different groups. I was always "they're coming," and who are they? They're coming. I don't know who, but they're coming.
They're coming.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, talk a little bit about what was it like being on the lam back in the day? Because you had no phones, you had no issue, you had none
the
of
drug on the lam was always staying 2 steps ahead of the DEA.
Okay.
So that's when we would move, in different states, different places.
Wouldn't own anything, just keep renting type of thing?
Oh, no, we owned a lot. They were just not in our names.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and that was the first on the lam. And then eventually that all crumbled. My husband got busted and, I think Norving and a lot of the big guys whose characters, interestingly enough, are in that film Kill the Messenger.
Okay.
The 2 guys that are in prison,
Right.
Danilo Blandón, that's my son's uncle.
Wow.
And Norving Meneses was my mentor. And so, that world kind of was collapsing. So that was the first on the lam. And then the one I just told you, but I was already out of the journalism business. And I just got wind that they were wanting to talk to me to testify.
Right.
What I knew about crack cocaine, because up until that point, it was just rumors.
Right.
That they introduced it into the ghettos to, completely destroy a whole generation, which they accomplished.
They did, yeah.
They accomplished.
They absolutely did.
But again, I'm not going to be testifying about drugs to people and having my face out there.
Yeah.
Because, like as you say, there were no cell phones and there weren't pictures.
Right.
And I started at CBS doing some on camera, but then I wised up. I said,
yeah,
I want to be behind the camera. I don't want my face popping up somewhere.
I feel like you lose the story when you get on the camera.
Well, because it wasn't that. it was because I was afraid of being recognized,
Right.
and then maybe somebody coming after me.
But I also feel like the more exposure you get, it's going to stop a little bit of the seedy exposure you get into the back world, because it's like, oh, you're too much of a face now.
Right, but I was doing both.
Right.
But then I asked to stop being on camera because my paranoia
Right.
was setting in, and it was probably drug paranoia. But
yeah, well, yeah, there's a little bit of that going on
yeah,
too, I'm sure.
and you know,
What was Robin Williams' joke? Anything that makes me paranoid and impotent, give me more of that. You
yeah,
know?
yeah, for real.
Well, so I wanted to ask you about how you implemented your authority into some of these situations.
In the different men's worlds that I'd be in.
Yeah.
Well, in the drug world, I was smart. I was from New Orleans. I grew up with the players. They knew me from a very young age, mentored me, if you could call being mentored into the drug business.
Right, absolutely.
But yes, you can be mentored. Women aren't especially trustworthy.
Or well thought of, right?
I mean, except for what they,
Right.
Right. Could do. And I was just always one of the guys. Same thing happened in the journalism world. It was a man's world.
Right.
Very seldom were there females working it, although we did get to the point where we had the dream team, and it was three of us. It was myself, Jane Wallace, who was a very prominent on-air
Right.
personality, and Olivia Wilde, the actress.
Yeah.
Her mom.
Okay.
Her mom was...
Wow.
Yeah, she worked for 60 Minutes, so we did... At one point, we were the dream team, and it was all female.
Wow.
And we had the best camera crews. Let me tell you what, you cannot survive in that business without the great camera crews teaching you what to do and the drivers protecting you.
Right.
And getting you back and forth and getting you in and out of sticky situations. So, the grunts.
Yeah.
And I could be a suit, and I could be a grunt carrying the tripod,
Right.
I would carry cameras, and the shit was heavy. The
Absolutely.
ikagamis back then.
Absolutely.
Oh, Lord. And I would never hesitate to carry my own weight, because it was always in the back of my mind I had to do everything as well as or better than any man.
Right.
I was always proving myself. For what? I don't know.
Right.
But...
something was instilled in you young.
Well, the daddy's approval that I never got kind of thing. Yeah. But, and it was the era in which I was raised,
Yeah, absolutely.
60s, 70s, where women,
definitely
hey, we're
man-dominated.
equals, we could do anything, and I did.
Yeah.
I did anything.
Well, the thought process was that, but the men hadn't really taken that role yet.
Oh, no, not yet. But because I acted like
Right.
one of the guys,
Right.
and I was never a chick,
Right.
unless I needed to be a chick to be pretty and use my feminine wiles for other reasons. But I was always up to something.
Yeah.
Always.
Well, a journalist normally is.
Yeah.
A journalist is always looking for a story.
Yeah, always up to something. Yeah.
Well, so talk a little bit about your kids. So how did your son and your daughter impact the decisions you made in your life?
First of all, my
moving forward?
son was the son of the drug dealer.
Right.
So once I got out of that, I knew I had to get out of that world because of him. And he's the 1-year-old I took to Nicaragua, to check out the revolution.
Right.
So he was there from the beginning. He was raised in war. And then I married another one of my other husbands in Nicaragua. We had a daughter. And so 2 kids, 10 years apart. And we all lived at the Intercontinental Hotel. CBS had our suites.
Wow.
I had my personal suites. And it all would happen to be on the floor where the presidential suite was. So
Right.
I had access to any dignitary, movie star, president that came to town.
Wow.
And the list of people that I partied with, from Jackson Browne to Pete Seeger to Graham Greene, the writer, to Jimmy Carter, Miss Rosalynn, the Secret Service,
Wow.
Buzz Aldrin,
Wow.
Mother Teresa, you name it. They were all, because everyone that came to Nicaragua was told, it was funny. It was like war tourism. And especially politicians would go on these fact-finding missions. But everyone was always told, look, no matter what you're doing while you're there, go look up this girl named Cookie. She runs the CBS office. She can get you anything
Anywhere,
you
right.
need, from U.S. Newspapers to direct dial phones to the U.S. I had a satellite. I could get sometimes cable. And she throws the best fucking parties in her office. So every day, come 5, 6, 7 o'clock, everyone would be in my office. So at any given time, I'd have Mother Teresa there. I'd have Buzz Aldrin there.
That's crazy.
Jackson Browne, Chris Christopherson, Richard Gere, Peter Gabriel, you name them.
Wow.
They were all at one time or another
Came
in
through.
my office.
Wow.
Mandy Patinkin.
Wow.
Peter, what was his name from 30-something? Peter Horton.
Peter Horton,
the director. Right? Yeah. Everyone wound up in Cookie's office.
Wow.
So that was fun.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Lots of fun.
Well,
so the kids were there.
Yeah.
They were living there, but they were really being raised by nannies and governesses. Obviously, I wasn't taking them out in the field.
Right.
And so they were safe in the hotel. And it was a strange war because the war never really hit the capital except a couple of times.
Right.
We literally had to go look. We called it the ever elusive war. We had to go look for the war in Nicaragua.
Wow.
In other countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Panama, it was there.
Yeah.
But so they were fairly safe. And like I said, I didn't take them, obviously, into the field.
Right.
And they became, my son especially, became the mascot for all these journalists,
right.
Cameramen, the grunts, all of them. And I remember one of the best lines in the podcast, my son, would be asked about his childhood. And he would ask his friends their childhood, and he would hear, he goes, that definitely was not my childhood.
Right.
Because he was having a mother being shot down, a mother being wounded, war. I mean, it was insane.
Well,
Bombings.
I can't imagine being a kid seeing your mother do all this stuff. I mean, do you feel like
it was normal for him?
Well, when do you feel like maybe the partying interacted with?
Well, the partying was always there.
Right.
Before he was born, while he was growing up, so that was always there. But I always hid that.
Well, right. Well, I mean,
I wasn't doing lines in front of him.
Right. No, obviously not. But like at some point.
Well, he knew something was up.
Yeah, it crosses at some point
because got a hangover.
Once they get old enough to start understanding things.
Well, Cookie can't get out of bed today.
Right.
Right. That kind of thing. Or mom's been up for 2 days, but he was still too young to know.
Right.
He knew. He found out. In later years, I never lied to my son.
Right.
And he was always considered my partner in crime. My daughter was different. She was 10 years younger.
Right.
She led a whole different lifestyle.
Right. She wasn't grown up and all that. Right.
She grew up in the war and the partying, but again, they were being raised by other people. So I was never, and regretfully so, I was never a hands-on mom, and I regret that to this day.
Well, and I mean, it's part of the lifestyle.
And she went in a different direction. Eventually, after the war was over, she went off with her dad and Georgetown and a whole different.
What is she doing now?
She graduated from Georgetown, then went to.
Wow, you did something right if you graduated from Georgetown.
And then she got her MBA in Spain, and that's where she met her Mexican husband. So she leads very normal, wonderful life, a life that might have been nice if I would have done things right.
Right.
Lives in Mexico, has 2 beautiful kids, and she never partied. Incredibly so. They say it skips a generation.
Yeah.
Same thing with my son, you
Well,
know.
I'd say, I mean, for me, I mean, I guess I can equate it to cigarettes because like my dad smoked around me, you know, since I was a kid, in
All our dads did. All our
with the
dads
window
did.
closed, and
Dude, while
yeah.
you're sitting on his lap driving.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
and or when I was like, I remember specifically, actually, this was probably the first time I took a drag of a cigarette. I was like, I don't know, 12, 13, and I'm hunting at the hunting camp, and he said, I'm going to bed. We're all staying up late, like blowing fireworks off at the dock, and he lights a cigarette, takes a puff, and he hands it to me.
Till
And
you
he
still
he goes, you light fireworks with this until it's out. You take a puff every now and then to keep it going. In the morning, I'll know if you inhaled. And that
Yeah,
was,
because you'll be sick as shit.
oh, I was so
Yeah.
sick in the morning.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I was
Oh, no, we
hurting.
grew up in the same kind of atmosphere.
But I feel like when I'm saying that I feel like it pushed me away from smoking cigarettes. You know, now
Well,
I smoke weed now, but the tobacco itself throws me off.
yeah. Well, and my dad was the type of Southern gentleman, you know, self-made millionaire, self-made man, that Cajun, by the way,
Right.
that thought a young lady's name should be in print 3 times in her life when she's born, married, or in
In death, right?
death.
Yep.
That poor man. I was everywhere. I was in documentaries. I was in magazines. I was in newspapers. I was. They would even. My parents would look at the police reports at every, you know, to see.
And Cajun men didn't have a whole lot of movement.
But
in their,
when I
in
say
their
Cajun, he
thoughts.
came from Cajun stock, but he was born and raised in New Orleans.
Right. Yeah.
But it was just another generation. And my mother was the same society lady, you know, a young lady, you know, has to go on dates with a chaperone. And I mean, it was.
Oh yeah. No.
I caught the tail end of the old world and just rushed in
Into
with the
new
new.
one. Right. Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny because my mom and my dad's dad had kind of a similar relationship because he was not very respectful to women. Grew up, you know, they're from he was actually born in Grand Isle in like 1910.
Oh, there you got it,
like,
man.
And so, but my mother was the one that would give him shit and push his buttons and make him feel uneasy about things, and that's the one he loved the most. He loved my mother because
Yeah. And they wanted us to be professionals.
Right.
Engineers, lawyers, doctors. And I wasn't any of those things.
Right.
But then I became a journalist, and he was proud of that.
He was proud of that. Awesome.
Even though he still called me that crazy bitch that lives in the asshole of the world. He just couldn't understand
Right.
why I was doing that.
Why you subjecting yourself to that?
In harm's way. It was a lifestyle conducive to the lifestyle I liked.
Right.
You know, big money, even though I didn't need the money.
High risk, big money.
And I didn't need the money. And that's what he didn't understand.
Right.
He was like, let me pay you to not do this.
Right.
But, you know, drugs.
But life experience is worth more than money.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And
broaden your horizons and blah, 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 blah.
Oh, yeah. No, listen, I've always like thrown myself in the deep end and see what happens. Always been that guy. Like it's more, I feel like you learn more about yourself when you figure out how to swim instead of just being walked into the shallow end.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah,
know?
we grew up in the same atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, so what role do you feel like you played to help the conflict, I guess you could say? Because, I mean, I know you had to feel some certain type of way.
So as a journalist, especially a war correspondent, you're supposed to be neutral. You're supposed to not take sides. You're supposed to go in, get what you need, come out. One of my first times up in the jungles, I told you my first pile of dead bodies. Oh, women are wailing, the dead husbands, civilians, not just soldiers.
Right.
The Contras were ruthless. They killed everybody.
Right.
And
as any rebel group would, you know.
And the Sandinistas that overthrew the Somoza regime decided they weren't going to be like them. They were going to do things more civil.
Right.
And so I'm being told by the producer at the time, executive producer had flown in, go record the wailing. Go. And I'm like, okay, I go in, but first I comfort the lady. I'm holding her, give her a handkerchief, and then is it okay if I record you in your grief?
Right.
Well, I got what we needed. Get back. And they're like, you can't be doing that. You can't get involved with the person. You can't get involved with the story.
Wow.
And I said, okay, then you're not going to get my services.
Right.
The first time that I have to go in unfeeling, and believe me, through the years, it got to the point where I didn't feel as much
Well, it's
horror.
like you have to.
You
have
get a
to,
little immune to it.
Yeah.
I said, if you guys are not going to let me do it my way, I'm not doing it at all.
Right.
Calls were made to New York. Calls were made to Washington. Listen, this chick is not doing things the regular way. And they were all asked the same thing. Is she getting the story?
Right.
Yeah.
Then let her go.
You're in a third world country. It's
Right.
not like you're being filmed or people
Right.
On the street are going to go back and blow the whistle.
No.
Let her do it.
Let her do it.
And from that moment on, it was carte blanche. I could do anything and get anything, any story by any means. It didn't matter. And then what happened, of course, like the question was,
right,
alliances. Who do you feel for? Who's on the right side? And unfortunately, it was always the side that the U.S. was
not on.
Not on.
Right.
And so I got to be very close with, the revolutionaries. And it just, as an American, I just had to do what was in my heart. I had
Right.
to follow, what was right, even if it meant being a little more biased than I should have been, and I'll admit it. And CBS knew it.
Right.
They knew it. There's no way that they could have imagined that I was getting everything that I was getting and not schmoozing some hands and
Right.
Not in bribes. There were no bribes. We couldn't do that.
Right.
But
Then you
a
can't pay for a story, right?
a Walkman here or
Right.
there, a pack of cigarette
Right.
Marlboros here or there.
Right.
I'll tell you what was the biggest bribe. Fucking Mardi Gras beads and Mardi Gras cups.
I was going to say nudie magazines.
No.
But...
Mardi Gras beads and Mardi Gras cups.
Wow.
Because the rich people loved the Mardi Gras cups for their yachts. The poor people loved them to live on.
Right.
And the Mardi Gras beads, everybody loved them and everybody wore them.
That's awesome.
Well, we had one of our executive producers called it Trinkets for the Natives. I know that that's not politically correct
It doesn't
now,
matter. No.
but that's what it was called, Trinkets for the Natives.
Wow.
And I always made sure that
You brought some with you.
anyone around me got stuff.
That's crazy. Something so simple as a Mardi Gras bead.
And I'm going to tell you, that kindness
Mm-hmm.
kept us from being killed.
Wow. Well, do you think some of your non-formal training for journalism helped you with all of that? Do you think like that's part of what was...
Well, I was mentored by the best.
Right. That was part
I
of
was
what...
mentored by real journalists.
Right. But you were mentored in the real life of journalism.
Correct.
So like learning from school was a whole different animal.
Right. But that schooling that I got helped me talk.
Well, yeah. But like, so I would say it like this. So like, one of my first production members when I was starting in music was a jazz percussionist. He graduated UM for jazz percussion. He top of his class, one of the best drummers I've ever met, timing wise, just absolutely crazy. You ask him to do a solo, can't do it.
Wow.
Too technical. He doesn't know how to go off the top
Wow.
of his head and just do something crazy. It's got to be musically right and technical, and so the adaptability wasn't there. So
Right.
So my question is, do you
Well,
feel
let
like...
me tell you this. A lot of the higher ups, the correspondents, the suits, they were all very well educated.
Right.
But the grunts,
Right.
the cameramen, the soundmen, the editors, not necessarily.
Right.
Some were, some weren't.
Right.
So I could talk with everybody.
Right.
And those grunts, and I will admit as well, the suits, the higher ups, they all took me under their wing because I was taking care of everybody and I was always getting the story. I was always making everyone look good.
Right.
So they all mentored me.
Well, you were doing the dirty work.
And they all mentored me.
Right.
This is what you do. This is how you stay alive. This is how you get this type of interview. This is what you.
Which is
but
better
then when you go to New York, and you're, in the fishbowl at CBS on West 57th,
Right.
you're going to be wearing your fur coats and you're going to be wearing your suits and your briefcase, and you're going to look like you're one of them too.
Absolutely.
Because I was one of them.
I just don't think you learn the relationship building and the massaging that you have to do in school. I don't think you learn that. I think you learn your
some of it was, but no, you're right. Not all of it.
Yeah, I feel like you're more connected to bullet points and processes than you are to adaptability and relationships when you actually graduate from, say, a journalism or for music theory or for things, and then when you get into the
and
field,
then comes like your
learn.
percussionist friend,
Right?
unable to adapt to certain things,
Right.
But I'll still say the main thing, besides being mentored, besides being thrown literally into the lion's den, my first day at work, I was headed to the jungles to film dead bodies. It was also, like you and I keep coming back to, we're from fucking New Orleans.
Yep. So, and I know you touched on this, that you had brought up from the beginning that you were not going to get involved in snitching on the drug trade and your friends and being a part of that type of journalism. How many times were you pushed to do that, though?
Remember I told you the first day of my interview,
Right.
I was told, not the interview in Nicaragua that sent me to the jungles. They then flew me to New York to interview with the foreign desk.
Right.
And I told them as well, I won't do drug stories.
So they never pushed you to?
Not only that, never even asked me why.
Wow.
Because they were smart enough to know if she's not doing drug stories, there's something shady going on here.
Right.
Just like a lot of people in my journalism world never knew that I had been a model in New York City, never knew that I had been in a drug cartel, but they really couldn't understand how I knew all these drug dealers,
Right.
Who were not only the subjects of a lot of stories, but they were taking care of all of us for our parties.
Right. So it was
That's where the overlap
so I guess
came in.
So it was like it was almost don't ask, don't tell type of thing.
Even though they suspected.
They suspected, right? Man, well, I'm just
like, for instance, I was asked to try to get an interview with Norbing Meneses, and I'm like, well, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And they're like, not a problem for you to get Norbing Meneses?
Not a problem.
And I'm like, no. I've known him my whole life. And they didn't say anything. As long as I could get what I needed to get.
Wow. And that's, I mean, and that had to be really hard not to blur those lines, especially being,
But remember, as a child living in two different countries, two different cultures, I was already used to that.
Everything,
I was already one person here, another person there, yet another person there, and wait, there might be another cookie back here.
Right. Yeah, that's just crazy. I mean, that's a hell of a balancing act that should be taught. It should be talked about.
Oh,
because that's something that just doesn't happen often.
Well, it'll get you far in life, or it'll get you killed.
Right.
It's one or the other. It's one or the other.
Either way, you have a good life experience, right?
And I could still be killed, but I'm not in dangerous situations. Well, sometimes I still find myself in some shady moments, but...
Well, so what about your story made you feel like you wanted to tell it right now?
Well, I never did want to tell it. So about 13 years ago, I have a cousin. I don't know. Do you know Gary Wainwright, a big defense attorney here in the city? He ran for DA
familiar.
one time.
Sounds familiar.
Well, whatever. He's married to one of my cousins, and so she knew Steve, who was here with us today, and she apparently wanted to do my story. I could see that was going nowhere because it was going nowhere. Let's leave it at that. So she introduces me to Steve, and Steve and I meet one day, and we sit down at a restaurant, and he says, "Look, I'm going to come right out and say this to you. I was told all about you. I've heard what I've heard, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think you're full of shit, and I don't believe anything." I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Great. Let's have a cocktail and then meet me here tomorrow at noon."
Right.
And then that next day, it's what we call now the infamous box. I bought the box.
Got you.
And it was the box with the receipts, pictures, newspaper articles, magazine articles, videos, you name it.
Right.
And I handed it to him, and I said, "Take this home. I want it all back.
Right.
And we'll talk in a week." He called me the next day. He said he hadn't been to sleep. He stayed up all night, went through the box. He says, "Let's talk.
Right.
I want to do something with you." And at first, I think back then we were talking either, I don't know, a movie, a book. We didn't know podcasts hadn't started yet.
Right.
So we started, talking, and it was a long, long process knowing what we were. First, he had to get to know me. First, he had to put me in order.
Right.
My life in order. This happened then this, the chronological order I'm referring to, because I was all over the map.
Right.
Oh, I lived 10 years here, and I lived 10 years there. Then you'd be 100 years old.
Right.
So he got to know me, and we joke because he now knows me better than I know myself sometimes. And then podcasts came out.
Right.
And we said, "Hey, this is a new medium. Maybe we could do this and have fun with it."
Right.
And then I don't know if you know the studio here, Esplanade Studios.
Mhm.
Yeah. So first the writing, then recording. It took us a couple of years. We knew that that's where we were going, but our ultimate goal was no longer going to be a movie. We wanted to then go into TV and possibly a doc series,
Right.
which is exactly what we're doing
right now. Right.
Because the podcast was such a success. And by the way, I got to plug it, Journalista. We're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeart. We're everywhere.
Absolutely.
And we have a website, journalistapodcast.com, where you can still get all the episodes, but there's pictures, there's a written history, background about everything. And it just really, really took off. And now we're in talks with some really big names in Hollywood, not just agencies, but managers, agents. And I'm not going to give you the names, but we've had a couple of actresses that listened to the podcast, picked up the phone, called their agent, said, "I want to be Cookie." Because now this will narrow it down, and you might be able to figure out who. We have to do a Latina actress.
Gotcha.
Even though I'm half and half, but because of appropriation, cultural appropriation.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Yeah.
So we're going to do a Latina actress, 2 of the top 10 in Hollywood. I'm sure you can figure it out. Want to do the podcast. And then Fernanda Muriel, Academy Award winner for City of God, wants to do a doc series. So we're penciled in for that for next year, hopefully. Everything runs like at the speed of a snail in Hollywood. And let me tell you, David, it's a cutthroat motherfucking business.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
It is not for the faint of heart. I would prefer to be back in the drug world and in war.
I hear you.
And I don't even deal with the shit. Steve, the other producers,
it's crazy.
and my son, who is my partner in crime, He's out there in LA,
Awesome.
and he's also in the mix to taking care of things for me.
Awesome.
And so,
Yeah, it's definitely a cutthroat business. I mean,
well, you know, because you're in the entertainment business.
yeah. Well, and the funny thing, I was in the exotic car world beforehand, and I
Really?
thought that was cutthroat. Yeah. And then then you get in the music business, you're like, damn, and I feel like it almost.
Are you a car aficionado?
So no, that's why I got out of it. So I was good at selling cars because I looked at it as a piece of metal.
Right, but it wasn't your thing.
No, it wasn't my thing. I mean, I enjoy cars. I don't love cars. I love music. I love entertainment in the space that I'm in. So it's a different feel.
Well, Journalista started out, it was just going to be an entertainment project. But then it morphed into not only entertainment, women's empowerment, addiction.
Right.
Call 1-800 if you got a problem, call 1-800.
Right.
And educational.
Right.
So these 4 avenues just then opened it up to, we were invited to crime
Right.
podcasts. We were invited to women's empowerment, different shows. And I'm out in LA every month.
Right.
First, because I love it and I love the dispensaries, man. That's my favorite thing. My son lives out there. And we got a pretty nice group of people out there.
That's awesome.
I've always hung out with younger people. All my husbands kept getting younger. Like the one I got now is 26 years younger. So, but I'm sticking with this one. I'm too old to be out there. But yeah.
Well, I feel like I said before, I told you. I mean, it's got to be a movie the way your life has gone. But I just feel
movies are more difficult.
I agree, but the docuseries, I feel like all that can come first.
It's the TV series that's going to do it.
Yeah, well,
not the doc series. The doc series is
something needs to be called "Take a Bite of the Cookie." I'm just telling you right now, something's got to be called.
Yeah, well, I'm retaining my book rights.
Gotcha.
And I will have to change the title because we're going to sell Journalista.
Right.
So I was thinking Tough Act to Follow.
Okay.
That's a good one you just gave me.
I like that one. Yeah.
So I'm retaining the book rights.
Good.
So we'll, eventually do that. If I'm still around, dude, it's like this shit's got to happen quicker rather than later because I'm getting old.
No, I hear you. No, and
I'm getting old. I can't. I'm even having a hard time hanging sometimes because.
Well, and telling the story over and over and over again.
Well, no,
tiring.
not that part. It's the staying up late at night. I still stay up late, so I can't hang as well as I used to.
I hear you. Well, okay, so a couple questions before we get to the ending conclusion parts. Where, how do you feel about journalism today? Do you still love it?
I love it, but I feel that what's happening, we all see it. It's completely divisive at, 2 different sides. One side's actually telling the news, and the other side is like, what planet are you motherfuckers on?
Right.
That's one thing.
Right.
Second thing, the danger is now exponentially greater.
Right.
At least back when I was... journalists were respected.
Right.
We'd wear T-shirts saying, "Don't shoot, I'm a journalist," and sometimes that would work.
Right, right.
And they wouldn't want to kill you because they wanted their story to get out.
Right.
Now nobody gives a fuck.
No, because now the story comes out on the phone.
And even your viewers will kill you.
Right.
If they can.
Right.
As you've seen in the years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, of course, now, I don't want to get into politics, but now, because of recent events, I'm off news, I'm off social media, I'm off everything. I can't do it. I have to recover from and what's coming, and it's been very, very difficult for me this last month.
You've seen a lot of the inside stories and tracks that most people aren't privy to, especially with the government.
And I can see that the corruption can come from all angles.
Well, so it's got to be hard for you to trust people in this world.
And you also got to remember, who did I deal with in all my years of journalism? Autocrats, authoritarians, dictators, assassins.
Right.
Some of my best friends were hitmen.
Right.
From the drug days. straight up hitmen.
Right.
So I trust them more
More
than
than the government.
the dictators, the
Yeah.
authoritarians.
Yeah.
With
But
the hitmen, you're on the good side. They're not going to kill you.
no,
You know?
listen, they're like I said, they're it's a family, and they're a close
And you
knit
were right,
family.
you know, and you're the first person in all my interviews that I've done that's actually said that. And you're right. It is my family.
Yeah, it's a family.
It is my family. And even with the journalists that I worked with, the grunts, the suits, no matter what political side of the spectrum we're on, we never attack each other.
Right.
You know why? We were a band of brothers then. We're a band of brothers now, and we're going to die a band of brothers.
Absolutely.
Because we were right there in the trenches.
Loyalty wasn't questioned.
And we were right there in the trenches, and we needed each other to stay alive. We needed some more than others. They needed me a lot to help keep them alive. We will always be a band of brothers.
Absolutely.
And you were the first person that brought that up about the family, the drug, all of it.
Absolutely. Well, and I understand it a little bit. Going back to Pasafinos, my grandfather at one point dated David Ochoa's granddaughter, Zarella. And Zarella used to tell me about stories about when she was a kid, 10, 12 years old, in the back counting cash, because all they did was allow family to do that.
Paths with them.
Really?
And Zarella was a very young kid.
Okay.
But yes.
So my grandfather dated Zarella at one point.
I mean, yeah. Well, the mother.
Well, it was his granddaughter.
Got it.
It was David's granddaughter.
Got it.
But she used to tell me stories, and we had gone to Colombia a few times, and they hosted us, and the Ochoas were a big Pasofino family. They had the 8 on the all the horses.
Exactly. We know what that meant.
Yeah, 100%. They were also involved in bringing the drugs in the horses at that point.
Correct.
But
we had a scam of doing it with homing dolphins.
Wow.
Man, well, that's a story for another day.
Wow.
That's a story for another day.
We got Russians training bomb dolphins or dolphins to bring bombs, and now you guys are training them to do the drugs.
Well,
they're a pretty smart animal.
I came up with that one, but that was a good one.
That's crazy. That's crazy. But yeah, so they were shipping the horses over with the coke in the uterus, and they were doing surgeries when they would get back over.
Oh, I know.
But anyway, the reason I understand it's a family is because of some of the talks that she had, and I've been friends with some of them.
It has to be your family.
It's absolutely, they have to trust you.
The loyalty.
Yeah.
They have to trust you, and you're one of them. They're one of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pablo, I used to call him Jefe, El Jefe, and he used to call me his little girl. Come here, come sit next to me. But not in the dirty old man sleazy kind of thing.
Right.
Because he just like everyone else was told by Nortamy, don't you ever touch my little girl.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, and no matter what.
And I know they were bad men.
Hey, listen.
I was a bad person too. I know the things that I did were not good.
If you look at history, for the most part, they were good men seeking money and seeking a family
and they took care of other people.
Right. And that was just the role that they ended up playing. From what I understand,
from whatever circumstances.
Right. From what I understand, Pablo didn't give a shit about coke. It just ended up he was already transporting shit, and it just turned into that's what he started transporting.
But he took care of his villages. He took care of his people.
Right. Which is why he was so powerful. In the end of the day, you're more powerful than the government.
There it comes to why you don't get killed. You're kind.
Yeah.
You treat people with kindness. Okay. And you get to be one of them.
Which is one of the worst things the government does, because they don't treat anybody.
They don't know how to do it. And they don't know how to be one of anybody.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about this generation in the drug world that's moving on
First
right now?
of all, let's put it to you this way. I would not be a good person in the drug world now, because you don't know what the fuck you're getting.
Right.
You don't know what it's cut with, the fentanyl shit.
Right.
And, I mean, unless you're dealing with your own people.
Even then. nowadays.
No,
Yeah.
that would still be okay.
Yeah, I
If you
mean,
still have the right
well, it
connections.
depends though, because not in the U.S. I feel because even the connects are getting screwed up drugs.
Well,
Like
no, when I say connections, I'm talking about the
direct. Yeah,
bosses.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So even in
But
this country, it's still possible to do it right. But I'm old. I got a heart condition. It ain't happening anymore.
so how did you come to that revelation? When like
Well, when kids
when was
started
it?
dying, the fentanyl and all that, I, I cleaned up my act about 20 years ago.
Okay, and
But
you did it cold
that's even
turkey out of the blue by
well, no,
yourself.
that's after I'd been in Betty Ford a couple of
Okay, all
times.
right, okay,
So that was in the 80s, but on my own when I married this latest husband, and we've been together 20 years. He's 26 years younger. I'm forced to live another 30 years.
right,
And I wasn't going to.
right.
So yeah, I did it. So
Which good on you because it definitely is not
it's
easy.
I'm too old
It's
and I
not
got a heart
easy.
condition. I had a fucking heart attack. What the
Right,
fuck?
right.
You
Something's got
know?
to wake you up. Yeah,
Yeah, well, even death doesn't wake you up. I think it was more this husband,
well, I feel
but
like death with kids can wake you up. Like a thought of death with
not even
kids.
that.
No,
I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't the hands-on mother, and I don't know. I guess I was selfish, whatever. But yes, I have changed.
yeah. Well, every addict's selfish in their own
And
way.
then, yeah, once you get off the drugs, you start thinking clearer.
Right. Everything kind of opens up a little bit.
Well, and what started off as your best friend, whatever drug it was, it eventually turns
Turns
on
into your
you
enemy. Yeah.
and turns into your enemy, which is why CBS sent me to rehab twice at Betty Ford, where they thought I was the new counselor coming in. And I'm like, no, I'm your new patient.
I've just been here this many times.
No, I was in a suit and a briefcase,
Oh, all right.
and I'm watching the news saying I should be there. And they're like, I want to give me some of whatever she's on,
Right. Aye, aye, aye.
But those two times they took for a while, and then, I just did it on my own in my 50s. So that's why I'm still here, I think.
I got you. Well, so yeah, it's definitely more. I feel like it's more of a dangerous world now than it is
It's
and ever has
definitely.
been.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then you got drug dealers that don't give a fuck about life, or,
Right.
they don't cherish life. And, we were the type of group that had ethics.
Right. Well, you had family. You had real
Well,
families.
it was
like they had
ethics.
kids, they had wives, they
And,
had
but it,
like
it was ethics, a guy owes you 1,000, another guy owes you 100 grand. Who are you going to have killed?
right.
The guy that owes you 1,000, so that the guy that owes you the
100
100
pays
grand
you.
will pay you.
Right.
Now they don't give a fuck. They'll just kill you for a dime bag.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah. Well,
the Colombians had ethics.
had ethics.
But once the Marielitos and the Mexicans got in, and that was another thing. All the drugs were coming from Mexico. U.S. decides to spray paraquat, the poison, on the fields, the marijuana fields.
Right.
But they weren't counting on the young kids were still smoking it and dying because they didn't care.
They didn't care, right.
So then that forced the drug trade to go from Mexico to the cartels in Colombia. And then once they attacking the Colombian drug cartels, it goes back to the Mexicans, who we all know those cartels are the worst.
Yeah, no, they definitely
ruthless.
there is no ethics there.
Ruthless.
Yeah.
Ruthless.
They definitely have given the cartel its name as far as that. And
Yeah.
Pablo had his part in that too. Pablo kind of went crazy with the government for a while.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like that was also part of the downfall, right? Because they started making noise where people wanted them to be quiet.
It's because, look, it's like dictators and the big time drug dealers. Do they not watch the movies that shows that in the end you're going to fucking get killed,
Right.
or thrown in prison? Any good dictator would know, leave at some point.
Right.
Which is what's happening now in Nicaragua with Ortega. They
Right.
won't leave.
Right.
And then the drug dealers, the same thing. They just you get to a level of wealth and power that you just you can't, you don't leave. You don't see reality anymore.
Right.
But
No.
I always watched the end of the movie. I knew when to get out.
Right. Yeah. 100%.
I
No,
knew when to get
I
out.
know what you mean. I knew what you mean by that.
And these
Well,
guys never knew when to get out.
yeah. Well, I mean, greed, power, and all kinds of things.
And I'm talking
Well,
dictators and drug dealers.
oh yeah. No.
And a lot of times these dictators were
Listen,
facilitating
how long have
drugs.
some of these senators been in power? Like it's this. It's kind of the same
Prehistoric.
obsession.
They came from
some of the same
prehistoric
obsession with
times.
power. Well, so we've talked about these crazy highs in your life and the mountains that you climbed and things that you've done to create an absolute one of a kind life story. What's life look like right now? Like, what's a Friday night look like in Cookies?
Oh, listen, I became that person that I never wanted to be, the mediocre, average, quiet. I mean, till just recently, most of my people around, they don't know who they're talking to.
Right.
Now I go to the vet, I go to the grocery. I had a neighbor come and knock on my door saying, "Who the fuck are you, man? I thought you were just a neighbor with a loud, loud voice." He says, "Who the fuck are you?"
That's crazy.
I don't know whether to be scared of you or
Your best
I say,
friend.
"You don't need to be scared of me." But yeah, I'm very, very quiet, unassuming life, which is now not like that anymore because of the projects that we have going.
Right, stoking some fires right now, huh?
Yeah, I just got back from an international film festival as a judge. If they only knew who was their judge, with people waving, "Oh, it's Cookie from Journalista, and can I have your autograph?" And it's like, do I want to go back to the notoriety? I don't. I'd rather just come back and be nobody again. And I know you and I know I'm not a nobody.
Right.
But I like being a nobody
Yeah.
for a little while.
There's peace in the quietness.
It was nice.
Yeah.
They aren't after me.
Right.
Who is they?
Right.
It could have been soldiers. It could have been the government. It could have been drug dealers, the cops.
Right.
The cops were the most they, But yeah, my life's changed a bit. But like I said, I can relinquish some of my duties to my son, and because he's always been my partner in crime. He
That's
was there
awesome.
throughout the whole thing. And his dad was Chino.
Right.
So,
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and he's
And he called Pablo uncle.
oh man.
And Rick
Well,
Ross was his uncle. Not Rick Ross, the rapper.
No, I know better. Okay,
Yeah.
I know better. The actual guy who did implement the crack.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, but I would love to have him on and talk about his story too. Because
No, that will never happen.
that'll never happen.
None of those people. That's going to be a
No,
problem.
I was talking about your son.
Oh, my son would
Yeah, I
love
was
to
talking
do
about your
it.
son because that's what a crazy life he's had.
He might be in town in February. I'll let you know.
I would love to have him on.
Yeah, he was my partner in crime, and he was just a product of the lifestyle. And he's a great fucking kid.
Yeah.
Not a criminal,
Right.
not. Because he calls me OG. He
Right.
calls me a thug. He said, "You're still a thug at 70, And I am. I'm still, because sometimes I got to do stuff to remind myself I can still do it.
Right, 100%.
Yeah, I can still do it.
100%.
And nobody looks at a old
No.
white lady.
No.
I get away with more shit now. I could get away with more shit now than I did back then, but gladly I'm not. But yeah, my son, unfortunately, and fortunately for other reasons, was caught in the middle of everything. He was there.
Yeah, look, I mean, I have a not as crazy of a story, but I was thrown into a lot of adult situations when I was a kid that I shouldn't have been thrown into as well, and kind of grew up quick and did some things.
But it made you who you
Oh,
are.
100%. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think I peaked at 17, which is kind of nuts because of
Yeah,
all,
glory days,
all
like
of the crazy
Springsteen,
stuff it
glory
did at
days,
17. I mean,
No, at 17, I was just getting started.
Yeah, no, so-
I was getting started at, get this, 14.
wow.
Because they were training me in
Right.
Nicaragua. I was that little kid hanging out with the big boys,
Right.
with the older boys.
Right.
No girls.
But there's peaks and valleys in life, and then, like at 17, I was a world champion Pasofino horse rider, as well as a world champion deep sea
And growing
fisherman,
up in the lifestyle
and
that
growing
you
up in the
were,
lifestyle and all
the
that, and
adult lifestyle.
traveling around like crazy. That was 17. Like I missed 117
Of
days
school.
of my senior year.
Oh yeah, my son missed school, would miss school all the time. I would have to pay schools just take him.
So I had
Put
to
him
go
in.
to a specific school that would allow me to go to school year round. I never had a summer because I was
Wow.
traveling so much.
Yeah.
So whenever I was in town, I was in school, and then I was out.
Yeah.
But being in those situations, you grow up really fast.
You grow up faster, and guess what? We're much more interesting people.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
But no, I wouldn't trade anything for. But it definitely gave me an interesting life to talk about. So I'm sure your son. And
that's why you're so good at what you do now.
Well, I appreciate it.
And I've really, really enjoyed doing this with you.
Me too.
Well, because like I said, a lot of these shows that have me on, and even TV shows and radio shows, they just want to talk about the drugs. And it's not just that.
No, it's a piece.
It's all of it.
Yeah, it's a piece of the puzzle.
It's all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and your life, to me, was, the partying was fun, but to me, your life story is more in the journalism and the critical role you played in some of the big stories.
Yeah.
So,
and there were a lot of big stories that I was involved in, and some I can talk about, and some I can't talk about because I was asked not to talk about it by our government.
Wow.
A crisis that I think I can talk about it. We talked about it in the podcast. I was the principal in avoiding a conflict between our government and the Sandinista government when MiGs were involved.
Wow.
MiGs were going to be flown in, and the State Department got in touch with New York Foreign Desk. New York Foreign Desk called me. We need you to talk to Ortega. Tell him that if he brings in these MiGs,
it's going to be a problem.
There's going to be a problem. And then crisis avert. And I had hepatitis, didn't know it at that moment, running around with an IV hooked up to a wooden hat rack, running back and forth.
Stopping Russian MiGs.
And we did.
Wow.
And I did. And that one was on me.
Wow.
But I'll always ask, how did the State Department know to contact me?
Right.
Because they were watching me.
They knew everything,
but I was on Reagan and Bush's, the first Bush's blacklist.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy.
And people were sent to discredit me. They would come with fake credentials for right-wing publications. I have some of them. And stories were made up. I was sleeping with all the generals to get stories. I didn't have to sleep with anybody. That was my badge of honor. I never had to sleep with people to get drugs because I had drugs.
Right.
I never had to sleep with anybody unless I wanted to.
Right, but you also ruin your credibility when you do that.
And if I could do it if I wanted to.
Right.
I'm not adverse to that either.
Right.
But boy, were there some attacks made on me.
I bet.
By the Washington Times, by really right-wing rags, and they were taken to court.
Wow.
CBS always fucking backed me.
Wow, that's awesome.
Even maybe not being 100% sure if they were true in some way.
But they backed you. But you were doing their dirty work.
They backed me.
Yeah, you were doing their dirty work.
Asked for retractions, and yeah, that was all stuff that was in the box I gave to Steve. The box.
The box. The famous box. Well, I can't wait to see that part of the docuseries when you hand over that box.
Yes, yes.
Because...
and I'm going to try to get maybe a couple of the drug people, but most are dead, in prison, or
don't care about it
very not willing to talk.
Yeah.
Very not willing to talk. And I'm not going to name a name, but somebody reached out to me like, can you stop talking a little bit about, I'm trying to clean up my image right now. Please stop.
Right.
So it's still a tightrope sometimes.
Yeah.
But then I've got another one, huge guys, like, I am for this, 100%.
Need a story told. Yeah.
Well, because his story's already been put out there. Nordring Meneses.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
So if you look him up,
He's already there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways.
Well, so nowadays, what brings elation to you in your life? You know, because elation,
waking up every morning, I'm alive.
Right? Because we define it as peak happiness. So what?
Peak happiness is I wake up alive every morning. I wake up right now telling you a story that in 24 different ways I shouldn't be here.
Right.
I should have overdosed and died. I should have been shot. I should have been, well, I was shot, but I should, crashed and I was in a helicopter crash. I was in an airplane crash. I'm the safest person to get on a plane with because I've already had it happen.
Right.
Yeah. So I just think that it was just time for this stuff to get out and people to hear it. Maybe somebody learned something.
Right.
And I know you didn't touch upon this, but the addiction part got really, really bad.
Right.
What goes up must come down.
Absolutely.
And so what makes me happy is that, I'm clean, I'm alive, I'm here talking to you. I can possibly help
Absolutely.
some people, whether it's getting clean or women's empowerment, the next girl that says, you know what? I can do what she did.
Right.
I can become a journalist. I can do that.
Right. Absolutely.
Because now women are now being, again, disrespected and, and I fear that we're going to have a few years of that. And so that makes me happy.
Right.
And my kids, my grandkids, I never thought I'd see the day that I'd have any of that.
Right.
And I got a great 26 years younger husband that loves me no matter what. He hears these stories, and this guy, he's from Kenner. He'd never been out of Kenner, and now he's got a wife with this and he's got a great life,
right.
A very interesting life. And I'm not saying this is my final act, but it could be.
Well.
Yeah. And I'll be going out with a bang.
With a bang and the way you want to go. That's the best way to end
not
an
overdosed,
elation.
not shot and left for dead in the jungles, never to be found again.
Right.
And so
no, that's awesome. No, and that absolutely has to bring elation to you.
It brings elation to me.
Telling your story.
It brings happiness to
absolutely.
me. Even though, as we just mentioned a short time ago, circumstances in the world right now are making me very fucking depressed. But again, I'm off social media. I'm off the news. I don't know how long it's going to be. And it's funny, for me to get off the news, which was my whole fucking life up until November the 5th.
Right.
My whole life. And so I hope that, I think some of my elation has been taken away in the last month, but I'm hoping to get it back eventually.
I got you.
And get back on that fucking horse and just do whatever it is I got to do next, which I think is going to be the doc series. Yeah. I think we're penciled in for next year with Fernando Muriels, which I know you know him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He's a great guy.
Yeah. Super
interesting. But I keep trying to tell him the part about the drugs, we're not going to get too many people wanting to talk about it. We'll just have to be in Miami. Well, this is where this happened, but who's going to want to be on the air?
Just put somebody and dark them out and put some voice on them and tell the story. Nobody will know who it was.
Although I have one local friend, I'm sure you know him, Wayne Del Corral, New York Pizza.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know Wayne?
Yeah, I know Wayne.
Well, he was, not only I grew up with him, and he went to school with my brother, and we've been friends since he's 13. He eventually came into our business.
Right. Yep. So my dad used to ocean race with Al Copeland.
Okay.
So
and you know Al.
I know Al.
His house, you couldn't have cell phones. He was paranoid. But Wayne says, say my name and everything. I want to be in everything. He doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
No.
So we'll get Wayne for sure. I'm going to tell Wayne. I didn't know you knew Wayne.
Yeah. So
we're partners in crime, and we've been partners in crime since he's 13.
oh,
so
wow. Well, he'll probably remember my grandfather more than me, but David Burris. But yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I was around him a little bit. Al and all those guys. I mean,
oh yeah.
But
Partying at Al's was.
Oh, so I want to end this because we've been talking forever soon. But a quick little story about Al. When my dad beat Al in that was in
one of the
'96
races?
in the race
Yeah.
for my dad had the world speed record on the water. It was 1996. He was doing 147 on the water. And him and Al were going back and forth, and my dad beat Al. Al won the next year. My dad beat him the next year, and then Al came out with the airplane jet engines in the boats, and everybody went, "Okay, I'm out." They started doing 275 on the boat, and everybody's like, "What are we doing now?"
Well, he liked me because I was one of the first females to run and race in motocross and win.
Well,
so he liked speed.
100%. Well, so the story I was going to tell was he came to my grandfather's office to talk about doing something. And after the meeting, I was with my grandfather at the time. After the meeting, we walked outside. He goes, "Hey, Dave, I want to show you something." So he had just had the Boss Hogs. And so he brought him out, and he had this crazy huge Boss Hog with a Chevy engine in it.
And you were probably one of the first to see it.
Wait, nitrous oxide bottles on the back. And he's talking to my grandfather on it. And he goes, "You want to go for a ride?" My grandfather goes, "Hell no." And he looks at me and goes, "You want to go for a ride?"
You did.
Absolutely. I jumped on the back, no helmet. Al didn't have a helmet on either. And we got on the interstate, and he gets up to like $150 and lets the handlebars go. And I'm just sitting here like, what is going on?
But you were still having fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, my dad was an ocean racer. I liked speed. I was a part, I trusted Al, but we're doing like $150 in interstate. He doesn't even have his hands on the handlebars. And we pull back into my grandfather's office, and he goes, "Man, you know why I can let go, right?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Because the engine is so heavy that the bike balances itself that well.
Can't sway.
It can't sway or do anything. It's just because it's a car engine, so it balances itself." He goes, "But don't let this fucker fall over on you because you ain't getting up." And
that's a great motherfucking story, dude, and that you lived to tell it.
100%.
Because you could have flown out of there,
but I would have a bug on a windshield.
Yeah.
But no, all those guys and the old school New Orleans guys are great.
Well, I used to jump out of airplanes, skydiving, motocross. We had a cigarette boat. We used to race in Miami. We had race horses. We did it. Well, it was a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. Yeah. It was all fast lifestyle.
The drug lifestyle.
Yeah, 100%. Fast lifestyle, 100%. My dad hung out with Reggie Fountain and the Benihana guy and all those guys, you know. So, Don Aronow, all those guys.
I love that our generation of war stories is not like the war stories of the older generations, which are actually war stories.
Yeah.
Ours is about the drug stories. But it's still war stories.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And it's what cut them all, you know.
Yeah.
But awesome. Well, great. It was great talking to you today, Cookie.
You too.
I appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. This, I think, has been my favorite
awesome
show that I've done in the last 2 or 3 years.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad Jason hooked us up.
Yeah.
You know, awesome.
Yeah.
But
and then I'll keep in touch with your people and let you know about my son coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Please do. Please do. And then I know you're not on your socials right now, but can you tell everybody where they can find your Journalista website and all that stuff?
We're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and it's under journalistapodcast.com, a website, and we have a Journalista page, which has got all the pictures from the box.
Wow.
We got great shit, pictures, all the players. So and the website's fun because of that.
Right.
It's got the modeling pictures. It's got the war correspondent pictures. It's got it all.
It shows the diversity for sure.
Well, you've seen it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Wait, my IDs for CBS News for a period of 20 years, each year looked like it was a different person.
Right.
My brother said, "You must work for the CIA because you don't look the same any year." So, Yeah, it's
No,
been
but it's
great. I've
awesome.
really enjoyed today.
Awesome. Me too. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And thank you guys for joining us today on the Elation podcast. Please click subscribe and watch more. Thank you.